Buenos días a todos y todas y gracias por acompañarnos en este segundo día, que va a ser un poquitito menos maratoniano que el de ayer, que soy consciente de que fue, aunque afortunadamente variado, interesante, pero maratoniano. Esta mañana abre la sesión Christine de Naeyer, a la cual le doy las gracias. Thank you very much, Christine, for being with us. Christine es una curadora, historiadora, periodista belga, que durante mucho tiempo estuvo trabajando en el Museo de la Fotografía de Charleroi, que es un museo que si ustedes no han visitado y tienen ocasión de visitar, se lo recomiendo porque tiene unas colecciones muy interesantes. Y en este momento es una curadora independiente que trabaja pues no solamente en Bélgica, sino en Alemania, en Austria, etcétera, etcétera, ¿no? Y durante este tiempo también ha trabajado como periodista en revistas especializadas, periódicos, etcétera. Pero seguramente muchos de ustedes la conocerán porque en los últimos tiempos ha hecho dos exposiciones que creo que han sido muy interesantes, una de Pieter Hugo y la otra, la SAP, Caballeros del Congo, en la que hace precisamente una revisión, que es alguna de las cuestiones de las que va a hablar Cristina. Así que thank you very much, Christine, for being with us. Y bueno, y también se me olvidaba decirles que es autora de un libro sobre fotografía belga, de los surrealistas belgas, que quizás no son tan conocidos, pero que son muchísimo más interesantes que los surrealistas franceses. I'm saying that the Belgian photographers are much more interesting than French photographers, surrealist photographers. Así que ya les dejo con ella y les doy las gracias por estar con nosotros. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Hello. So, African self-perception in a globalized world, from Congolese dandies to the portraits of Pieter Hugo, is quite a long journey, so let's start. 50 years independence of the Congo. Last year, in 2010, several African countries celebrate the 50th anniversary of their independence from colonial rule. Among them, the Democratic Republic of Congo, formerly a Belgian colony, and the Congo-Brazzaville, formerly French. Here you have I apologize for the bad quality of this picture. Some of the old pictures were taken from books. This is a picture of the Dutch photographer Cas Orthuis, who photographed Congolese woman wearing the portrait of Baudouin, King of Belgium and Congo, just a year before the independence. 50 years of independence is an important milestone to remember the past, but first of all, to question the present. As a Belgian curator, I was wondering how to reflect on the long and problematic history Belgium has with the Congo, and how it might be explored through photography. Dominated by a way of seeing and thinking imposed by colonialism for more than a century, Africa now expresses a variety of creative voices, able to investigate not only the legacies of the past, but the complexities of the present. I show you very important pictures from the Independence Day, pictures taken by the German photographer Robert Lebec, where you see the King Baudouin of Belgium and the Congolese President Joseph Kasavubu, and also a Congolese grabbing the king's sword, a symbol of the loss of white colonial power. Photography was present on the African continent from its early days in the 19th century. Here you have the first photographer, the first black photographers in Congo. And here a few pictures taken in different African countries already at the beginning of the 20th century and a little bit later. The portrait is a genre that has been widely used in Africa, but by the colonizer, but also as a means of claiming an independent identity. Today, photographs not only increasingly introduce the African reality into the global village in which we all live, but also play with or critically question historical stereotypes. As a curator, I was wondering how to avoid as much as possible the Manichaean contrast between black and white, which does no longer adequately translate the complex interactions between Africa and its former colonizer. Certainly, also to find another kind of pictures than those taken by some renowned Belgian photographers commissioned to take photographs in our former colony, such as those pictures taken by Marie-Françoise Plissard in 2000, or those 10 years later by Karl de Keyser, pictures showing buildings constructed by the colonizers that are now reduced to ruins and showing people surviving in a deep chaos. Of course, ruins and disorders are problems in Congo and many African countries, but I wanted to avoid the usual cliché of a post-colonial, poor and suffering continent that is forsaken by its former colonizer. The objective was to document a different facet of contemporary Africa, the African creativity and struggle for pride. La Sape. In this respect, La Sape appeared to me as an appropriate example. It offers an interesting opportunity to question what the African self-perception might be in a globalized world, to investigate not only the legacies of colonial and the post-colonial period, but also the complexities of the present. Here you have a pictures taken by Hector Mediavilla, the sapeur La Mame. But what does the word La Sape mean? La Sape is the abbreviation of La Société des Ambianceurs et des Personnes Élégantes. In English, it would be the Association of Ambient Setters and Elegant People. Sape is French slang for dressing with class. In French, we often use the expression il est bien sapé to talk about a well-dressed man. The term sapeur is now a common expression in French-speaking Africa, referring to someone dressed with elegance and style. La Sape is a specific and original movement, well organized, with codes and rules that emerged in big cities of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Congo-Brazzaville after their independence in 1960. And it is now also present through its diaspora in some European cities such as Paris, Brussels, or London. There are very few pictures from the early times. The African photographer Jean Desparat, born in Angola but active in Kinshasa, arrived in Kinshasa in 1950 and opened a studio there. He photographed the city during the 50s and later also in the 70s with the omnipresent rumba and cha-cha-cha concerts, the famous nightclubs and well-dressed men and women you may see here, some sappers. Most recently, a few photographers have made significant contribution to increase the visibility of La Sape in the Northern Hemisphere. The first being Hector Mediavilla, a Spanish photographer who took a few years between 2003 and 2008 to understand this movement and to interact with the most important Congolese sappers. After him, we have also the young Congolese photographer Baudouin Muanda and the Italian Francesco Giusti. Here you have pictures taken by Hector Mediavilla showing a sapper, already sapper, active during the 70s. Here other old pictures from the 70s. What's about the origins of La Sape? Of course, La Sape is a direct result of European colonialism. Last century, when the Europeans colonized the Congo, the myth of European elegance was born among the Congolese who were working for the colonizers. After having fought in Europe during the First World War, some Congolese soldiers, as you may see here, returned home dressed as perfect gentlemen. Their arrival caused admiration, and after their return, being dressed alike became more and more a symbol of social success and being part of the establishment. So here an old pictures where you may see a war veteran exhibiting his medals and uniform, and also colonizers with their servant. Those two portraits taken by Francesco Giusti give us an idea of the influence of the colonizers' dress codes. With humor, the sapper Joe Ballard chose some clothes reminiscent of the colonial period, a beige suit and 7 ties for the 7 days of the week. He performs a sort of dance at the entry of the first-class section of the railway station, formerly exclusively reserved for white people. Never say to a sapper that clothes are futile things and that the manner you are dressed and walk do not have an influence on the way people look at you and consider you. Here you have 2 pictures of the same man by Hector Mediavilla, the same man after the shower and dressed as a sapper. The same man and quite different because of his clothes. The sapper are accomplished artists with a personal style, and most of them have also a new name, such as here, the sapper de la Grâce, also known as the icon of beautiful colors. Generally, they only dress up on weekends and special occasions. Designer brands of suits and accessories are of crucial importance to them. A complete attire can cost a lot, although many of them don't have well-paid jobs. To get a whole prestigious outfit may take several years. Most of them start up with suits borrowed from established sappers who initiated them in the secrets of the sap. Here you see a sapper performing on the street, showing the important details of his suit, its label. Each sapper is unique, possesses a particular and individualized repertoire of clothes, colors, accessories, and gestures. Some accessories are particularly recommended, such as hats, another pictures taken by Baudouin, such as hats, sticks, umbrella, glasses, even if you don't need it really, cigars, pipes. On the left, pictures of Baudouin Muanda. On the right, pictures from Francesco Giusti with some sappers. To be elegant, the sappers need to know a few rules, such as the 3 colors rule, Here, on the left, you have the sapper allureux. The sapper allureux puts maroon socks because of his elbow tie. And to be very elegant, a sapper always has to avoid to mix more than 3 colors together. On the same slide, right, you have the sapper Le Baudeur in 3 colors, from the head to the shoes. These are the colors of the Belgian flag, black, red, and yellow. La Sape has a positive influence on the sappers' everyday life. Through their refined manners and originally dressing styles, the sappers add a touch of glamour to their humble environment. La Sape helps them to sustain their modest ordinary. It allows them to dream on. Here we have the sapper Christian Dior and the sapper Kama Sutra. As Lamam, an old sapper, said, "When I dress up and go out to the streets and people admire me, I forget about all my problems. These are moments of glory that make me immensely happy." The sappers have a social rule of importance to fulfill. They are the next door famous and have a similar role to the one played by our celebrities produced by reality TV shows. Their presence is required, for example, at funerals, parties, and other celebrations to bring a touch of stylishness to these events. Like for new celebrities, everybody knows who they are, where they come from, and even where they live. Even if everybody knows that their elegance is most of the time just a facade, they perform an important social function that gives them a central role in the Congolese society. Some pictures taken by Hector Mediavilla are showing quite well the contrast between the clothes and the sapper's daily life. Here in the courtyard of Lamam's house, or here the sapper Bienvenu Musieto and the sapper Willy Covery in front of their house. The last one here, the sapper Bienvenu Musieto in front of his house. In Brazzaville, the sappers have become a sort of model for the rest of the country, even for rich people, priests in the church, and politicians who need to be dressed as elegantly as they do. On the left, a sapper. On the right, politicians, pictures taken by Karl de Keyser. The sappers are not only concerned by elegance, but they are also concerned with morality. There can only be sap when there is peace in the country, and the sapper, by definition, is a non-violent person. All the activities were, for example, completely interrupted during the last civil war between 1997 and 2002. After the civil war, their motto became, "Let's drop the weapons, let us work and dress elegantly and fight only with clothes." Here you have on the left the sapper Lamam in the entrance of his house, where you see bullet holes from the last civil war, and also on the right the sapper Séverin poses near a tank reminding the civil war. And in the middle, the Abacost, Mobutu Sese Seko, the president of Zaire, wearing the Abacost. Between 1972 and 1990, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, then rebaptized the Zaire, Mobutu Sese Seko decided that every man had the obligation to wear the Abacost, which is the abbreviation for the French abat le costume, down with the suit. The Abacost is a lightweight, short-sleeved suit, inspired, in fact, by the Mao suit. Men were banned from wearing suits with shirt and tie to symbolize the break with their colonial past, but sappers didn't agree with this and maintained their own habits. La Sape is a dandies world. Its purpose is also something as to become a living work of art. Here you have sappers performing Being the Kings of the Street, pictures taken by Baudouin Mwanda. The sapper's world may be compared to the dandies from the 19th century in Great Britain and France. They also wanted to be looked at with respect and admiration, aiming for perfection to astonish and be the actors of their own life. Another picture taken by Baudouin Mwanda. And here you have, on the left, the sapper Bonga Bonga, and on the right, the first dandy in Great Britain, le Baron Robert de Montesquieu, at the end of the 19th century. Such as the dandies, the Congolese sap, except for very rare exception, is also a male institution, which is sometimes inherited from father to son, but most of the times adopted by personal choice. I show you another example of the dandy world. Yinka Shonibare, a very well-known Nigerian artist based in London, also refers to the world of the dandies. In a series of self-portraits, Shonibare transformed himself into a rich dandy living in the glorious British colonial past, when Africans were only slaves or servants, laboring hard to enable the libertine's way of life. As Shonibare says, there is always a price for pleasure. Shonibare rewrites the colonial history with Africans playing a leading part. Most recently, a few women became sappers, but to be accepted by men, they have to be dressed just like them. This adoption of male dress codes to gain their recognition is reminiscent of the female French writer George Sand in the 19th century, who wore a suit and smoked the cigar. On the left, you have the wife of a sapper, La Mam's wife, Madeleine, and on the right, a sappeuse, the wife of Yves Saint Laurent. The sappers perceive Europe as a glorified myth, which has a real impact on immigration. All of them share the same dream, to go to one of the big European capitals, mostly Paris, the capital of fashion, and return to Brazzaville or Kinshasa as ambassadors of the supreme elegance, with new and expensive clothes from famous designers. Here La Mam, already 70 years old, and the first time in Paris, discovering winter, snow, and loneliness. Of course, back at home in Brazzaville, he didn't say anything about this. For the Congolese sappers, the streets, even unpaved, are their catwalks. Here you have a sapper walking in Brazzaville. On the left, it's a detail of a picture taken by Hector Mediavilla, and on the right, the sapper Bonga Bonga, also in Brazzaville. But from a catwalk to another, the distance is not so long. The sappers have also an impact on the northern hemispheres. Here you have the sapper Willy Covary, pictures of Hector Mediavilla and also Paul Smith's La Sape collections. Just a year ago, the English designer Paul Smith dedicated all his women spring and summer collections to the Congolese sape. This was made possible thanks to the photographs taken in Congo that arrived to Europe. The globalized world is in action. So, after having created their own style with the Occident dress codes, it is the turn of the sappers now to become a reference for the European fashion industry. The two Congos are not alone in Africa to have their sappers. South Africa has also some sappers called the swankers. On the left you have a sapper from Congo, and on the right sappers, the swankers in South Africa. The swankers, such as the Congolese sappers, are originally poor black men from the Zulu ethnic group looking for self-confidence and pride, being dressed as rich men do. Here you have a few pictures taken by the South African photographer T.G. Lemon, pictures recently made in black and white of the swanker in South Africa. The swankers already existed during the apartheid regime. It was a manner to survive oppression and to be admired by black women. And the movement still remains an important reality now in South Africa. The swankers are workers who have found this way to channel their creativity and their hope for a better future than the workers' hell that apartheid created for them. The swankers' belief in self-respect, moral behavior, and mutual solidarity provided them hope. Their creative and incredible humoristic competitions for the best attired men, their male model performances in public shows with the jury, are for them a source of enjoyment in their uneasy and modest existence. I'll show you some other pictures of their performance. So what happens after apartheid? The systematic implementation of racism as the official political system attained its climax with the apartheid regime in South Africa. The famous South African drum magazine, dedicated to the black African struggle against apartheid and white domination, you see here a picture. But even in its pages, we find the white dream, such as this picture taken by the South African Bob Gozani, the picture called The Americans. Nevertheless, the apartheid and post-reality is a dual one. You have us and them, such as you see on this slide on the right, the cover of Drum, them and us, multiracial South Africa. The struggle against colonialism in South Africa, but also in Africa in general, imposes the idea of black is beautiful, such as the self-portrait of Samuel Fosso on the left, and also this another portrait taken in a studio in Sudan, or those quite well-known African hairstyle pictures from the end of the 60s, begin 70s. But what happens if you are neither white or black in Africa? Here we are in South Africa with Pieter Hugo. The picture is Sam Klein Karoo. It's a portrait of the series Portraits of People with Albinism. Pieter Hugo is one of the most interesting young South African photographers. He started his professional career just after the end of apartheid. Pieter Hugo dedicated his first important series to question of black South Africans suffering from albinism. As a young white man, originating from a family established for centuries in South Africa, Pieter Hugo is sensitive to be considered by the majority of his compatriots, and also in the continent, as a stranger and a living symbol of the colonial past. Pieter Hugo focuses all his work on self-expressions in the characteristic of personal and collective identity in South Africa, and more largely in Africa. Such as him, always looked at as a stranger in his country, people suffering from albinism are rejected by both white and black communities just because of a small genetic difference. Here, another picture from the series, looking aside with children suffering from albinism. Clothes as expression of the self, the social status, and globalization. As we had the opportunity to see with the sappers and the swankers, clothes are an important key of the self-expression in the post-colonial and global village. And this is also a major question for Pieter Hugo's next photographic works. Uniforms, dress codes, inspired by the colonial period, or imported from northern countries, and they're blended with local traditional clothing. Here you have a judge in Botswana. It's a real one. The picture was taken in the court in 2005. I show you some British judges. They are quite the same. Back to Pieter Hugo in Botswana. Here we have Boy Scouts in Liberia, children who were recently child soldiers and now are transformed into Boy Scouts, dressed with uniforms donated by industrialized countries. Uniforms aren't also the work of another South African photographer, N.T. van der Merwe, here with the series Trapping in 2002-2003. This is probably the most well-known series of Pieter Hugo's work, The Hyena Men, people living from their performance with half-wild animals in Nigeria, wearing a mixture of northern and traditional clothes. Show you another one with a shirt where you can read US. Here, the Wild on a Collector series in Ghana, in the middle of nowhere. Those people are protecting themselves traditionally with leaves, but they're also wearing Occidental clothes, such as here, a Mickey Mouse t-shirt. One of the last series of Pieter Hugo's work concerns an important African mode of self-expression, resulting from a mix between African reference and Occidental influence. It's Nollywood in Nigeria, the third largest movie industry in the world after Hollywood and Bollywood. Nollywood is the first movie industry producing in Africa and for an African audience on the African continent, as well as for the diaspora in Europe and the States. Those movies are cheap to produce with video cameras and easy to sell on DVD. This is essential for their success in Africa because there are hardly any cinemas left. For this peculiar series, Pieter Hugo worked with some Nollywood movie stars and also less-known actors, and a professional makeup artist who is employed by the Nollywood industry. And the pictures are always a mix of reality and fiction, where uniforms and references are very important. On the next slide here, also the same series, Nollywood. On the left, we have a two very important actors from the Nollywood movie, sort of black devil inspired by one or another Occidental nightmare, and a woman in an African dress. Also on the right, a man wearing a tailcoat near an old total can, reminding that Nigeria is one of the biggest oil producers in the world, while its population is also one of the poorest among Africa. In conclusion, an open question. From the Congolese dandies to the photographs of Pieter Hugo, we have seen how complex things are in Africa today. Also, people have created new and individual forms of self-expression that integrate not on dress codes, but have on their own, again, impact on fashion in the industrialized world. But things are even more complicated than we might guess. For example, here, if we look at this wonderful young woman, pictures very famous, taken by the Malian photographer Seydou Keita during the 50s, we probably shall think that she is dressed in a very specific African way. In fact, she is not. The wax print she is wearing came from a Dutch fabric. The three other pictures you see on this slide, I took them on the website of Vlisco. Vlisco in Holland produced the main wax prints for the African market since the mid-19th century. Although wax prints were considered in Africa as a typical African self-expression, they originally came from Indonesian motifs transformed into African ones by Dutch designers already in the 19th century. Yinka Shonibare, we saw a few self-portraits as a dandy. Yinka Shonibare, the Nigerian artist based in London, uses Dutch wax prints in most of his installations in this way, to show how difficult it is in the global village we are living in to say this is African or not. Africa and Europe have influenced each other a lot, and this has already occurred a long time ago. Samuel Fosso, Cameroonese. On the left, the same ID. Fosso used wax for the same reason as Shonibare. Wax is not typically African. It's not authentic at all. And Fosso, in this self-portrait, is really questioning the notion of identity, of African identity, and all the stereotypes, because also the African chief is also a stereotype in this picture. And on the right, a very early pictures of him. He was maybe 15 years old on that picture. He was disguised into a sapper for fun for this picture. Back to the sapper. Between the sappers and those sappers, two pictures from Francesco Giusti. Between those pictures from the sappers and those here taken in South Africa in the streets by a South African photographer, Nontsikelelo Veleko, there's a link. Both were exhibited in Paris during a show a few months ago in the Louis Vuitton, organized by the Louis Vuitton company. I was there and I take a few pictures. Here you have some pictures from Baudouin Muanda on the Louis Vuitton building in Paris. Here also. And here. As the photographer Francesco Giusti said, La Sape is the wish, particularly of young Africans, not to be left behind by society. So with such a show in Paris, or fashion pictures like here on the right, pictures I saw a few days ago in a fashion magazine in Brussels, and those also. We see how Africa and Europe are really part of the global village. And I would like to end this with a very funny sentence of an important sapper, also an important singer and musician, Papa Wemba. He said, "The white man invented the suit, but we have transformed it into a work of art." Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for this fascinating lecture and material. In fact, I was thinking about the very idea of what is Africa. I mean, you were talking about fabrics, how they are imported, etc. And I think it's very interesting, this post-colonial, this trying to avoid the post-colonial approach, because in some cases the post-colonial approach tries to find the real Africa, but what is real Africa ends up to be a built Africa too. So I think it's a very interesting, and the material is absolutely fascinating. Bueno, y abrimos el turno de preguntas, que seguro que hay cosas que alguien quiere comentar. De esta conferencia con este material tan interesante, me parece, ¿no? Hay por ahí hay alguien.
Good morning. Is it politically incorrect to ask about the relation that the African men have with clothes and trying to be the center of attention by the clothes? Is there is that a subject for you to ask why they do it? More, specifically about their social and about their social role in the society, or is that? Or have you answered this already?
I don't understand.
Perdona, yo tampoco he entendido mucho la pregunta.
Es políticamente incorrecto preguntar si por qué lo hacen exactamente.
Oh, okay, yeah. Whether it's politically incorrect to ask the reason why they're using this old fashion, etc. The men, the African men. Whether you have an answer for that. Perdona.
I think it's also a manner to question also our society, and the exhibition I organized was in an art center in Brussels, 2 minutes of the fashion shops, very expensive ones. And I think it's, of course, a possibility, I think, very interesting to focus on our relation with Africa, but also a portrait of ourselves. And it's important to discuss also this, because fashion is also a part of our reality, no? A lot of people, even, I think even in Spain, in Belgium, or elsewhere in Europe or in the States, we can eat pasta every day to pay very expensive clothes too, no? So this, I think it's an interesting approach for both Africa, but also to question our lives. No? I don't know if I understand.
Yeah, well, I'm not so sure about my question myself, but I think that
so it's difficult.
I think what I wanted what I wanted to go to is our relationship to fashion the same as the relationship of black men in Africa nowadays, or since the 70s or whatever? So do we use it the same way to appear or to get a sexual partner or to impress our friends? Or
I think they use it such as the dandies in the 19th century, though it might be more creative than most of the people. But for me, the subject is really important to understand also our values here, no? Not only to say, oh, there were very expensive clothes and their wives are so neglected and so on. You see?
Yeah, there we go. I think that's the point. No, what can we learn from this and about our own way to use fashion? Because it's like a caricature a bit of what you do for, what you use fashion for, no? To impress, to get the,
Yes, and it's a machist world also. Very. Also in South Africa, that's why I show you the swankers, because it's also a man world. And for a feminist as I am, it's quite difficult, but I think the subject is interesting, so...
If nobody else wants to ask, I just wanted to ask one more thing, which is why do the
Okay. I have to be moderadora. There's a lady sitting next to you, your friend, who wants to ask something.
I think actually that connections can be made throughout the world, and there's actually also a book written. It's called Code of the Streets. It's an anthropological book about Germantown in Philadelphia, which is a black ghetto. And I wonder if there's any correlation between the way you dress, depending on what's considered fashionable where you are, and the amount of respect you receive from your society that you're living in. Is that a question?
Which is the name of the book again?
The name of the book is Code of the Streets.
Code of the Streets.
And he draws a connection between what the young men in that society wear and the amount of respect that they gain, because they don't have a lot of possibilities to advance socially in their situation. Their main currency, so to speak, is the respect that they get from their peers, and they get it through wearing expensive watches, expensive necklaces, expensive clothes. And I wonder if you can draw a correlation between the sapeurs and that.
Do they?
Is there a question?
Yeah, whether it acts the same thing in Africa. Whether these men use this whole setup, to get respect from their peers. That's the question, right?
Yes,
if it's used in the same way as in Western culture, as you were saying before.
Yes, as I show you the picture after the show and dresses as a sapeur, I think it's a nice answer to your question. Of course, it's a manner for them to be admired and to be someone. Because I don't know if you saw other pictures of Congo, but it's really difficult, very difficult to live there. There's quite nothing, they have no future, so it's a manner to escape this, of course.
Había alguien por ahí también, perdón, había pedido la palabra.
Sí, muchas gracias, Christine. Un poco retomando lo que estáis diciendo a nivel de las preguntas, o sea, si hay un poder simbólico de la prenda que sí que está realmente integrado dentro de lo que es los propios sapeurs. No hay que olvidar, o sea, aquí se ha hecho un resumen de cómo surge la SAP. La SAP tiene una tradición también histórica hasta que se puede remontar de manera precolonial, de una importancia de la tela como elemento, digamos, de identificación de los congoleses, y luego la SAP, tal y como nace en un momento histórico también fundamental, donde es una reivindicación casi política de los sapeurs que dicen no a lo que has explicado brevemente de la bas cost, ¿no? Por una situación política y económica muy concreta. Es decir, yo creo que es importante frente a un modelo, a una sociedad que es un poco compleja y que a lo mejor muchos de nosotros desconocemos, insistir, digamos, en el elemento casi reivindicador, ¿no? Y político. Realmente los sapeurs, al vestirse de esa manera, están proclamando apartarse de la pobreza, efectivamente, en la que normalmente se les suele catalogar, ¿no? Y ese poder es realmente transformador, y no tanto insistir a lo mejor en que adoptan unos elementos coloniales, es decir, la referencia puede ser esa apariencia, digamos, de traje colonial, pero realmente lo que hacen es, como has utilizado tu última frase de Papa Wemba, transformarlo realmente, y es esa capacidad transformadora, ¿no?, del sujeto africano que normalmente no se suele aportar, ¿no?
Okay, I'll try to make a...
I understand. Yeah.
Oui.
It's okay. Yes, of course, the political context is important. That's why I show pictures of the Abacost, because it was a reaction also to an absolute non-democratic country.
Bueno, era un comentario sobre todo, ¿no? Sí, sí. Había alguien por ahí.
Hola. Bueno, a mí me había llamado la atención por ahí lo que había dicho al comienzo, cuando hablaba de que por ahí el tema de África se lo abordaba desde la pobreza, desde el caos, desde las ruinas, incluso también por ahí desde cierto exotismo. Entonces a mí me llamaba la atención por ahí la obra de Pieter Hugo, que él de alguna manera, yo no sabía que era blanco, de alguna manera él también rescata eso de África y lo lleva también como algo exótico siendo allá, ¿no? Entonces, un poco quería saber cómo lo percibía usted a esto.
Okay.
I just understand that he's white and in
no, that he said that, you know, the idea of African has been exotic or something like that, and how Hugo is a white himself, and how you perceive, you know, this kind of decalage between being a white man photographing Africa, no? Okay.
He's a white man, but if you ask him, he's an African and he's South African. So it's a key to understand a lot of his pictures, that he's white, but he's African, you know. For him, he's really African. So for him, it's not exotic. It's exotic for us, but not for him.
Bueno, la última pregunta para intentar ir hoy no tan tarde como ayer, que llegamos tardísimo. ¿Hay alguna otra cuestión por ahí? Bueno, pues entonces, si no hay nada más, muchas gracias, Christine, merci beaucoup. Y ya pasamos a la siguiente. Thank you. It was great. Thank you, Christine.